The various theories that have been presented by Otto Kernberg have played a pivotal role in the ongoing development of the object relations theory in psychology. This unique field of individual thought, first developed by Melanie Klein in the early 1900s, is one of the centralized theories that are rooted in Freud's original psychodynamic theory. The theory is based around the notion that early interactions that occur between infants and their primary caretakers, in this case the objects, and how these various interactions can be internalized as being mental constructs that carry out over the period of time. Thusly, this is an impact on the person's self-concept and that the overall nature of any future relationships they might have. It was Kernberg himself, though, that would go on to leave his mark on the theory of object relations. This included his theory on narcissism, a method of psychotherapy based on a form of transference, a unique developmental model, and a method for analyzing personality organization. Most notably was his borderline personality organization. In Kernberg's theory regarding narcissistic behavior, he focuses on how object relations can have a positive or negative effect on a person's overall self-esteem. He states that narcissism is a basic structure that occurs in almost every individual. Kernberg went on to describe the concept of narcissism as a, quote, libidinal investment of the self. In essence, it's referencing the manner to which self-esteem is managed and regulated. In this paper, we will examine these theories more in depth and how the verbal and nonverbal actions of Donald Trump suggest that, according to the theories of narcissism by Otto Kernberg, he has a common form of narcissistic personality disorder. Main page. On November 7, 2016, the radical Republican candidate Donald J. Trump defies the odds, beats one of the most seasoned and qualified politicians in American history, and manages to become the 45th President of the United States. His road to victory was riddled with controversy, scandal, false statements, alternative facts, and what some would call downright outlandish behavior. But how could a successful businessman, a man who clearly had multiple character traits that were nowhere near becoming of the leader of the free world, convince nearly 63 million Americans to vote for him into the highest office of the land? Simple. He made himself out to be the single greatest person to ever attempt to run for office, and thus is the single greatest person to ever be elected to do the job of President of the United States. While his candidacy dominated the political landscape, psychologists of today, while using the research studies of Otto Kernberg, began to examine the root nature of his behavior and attempted to understand why he conducted himself in such an egotistical and boastful manner over his opponents and pundits. Looking back on the childhood of one Donald J. Trump, we look at his 1987 New York Times #1 bestseller, The Art of the Deal. In the book, Trump goes on to talk about his early childhood life growing up in Queens, New York during the 1940s. His father, Fred Trump, was a small-time successful real estate developer who built large-scale apartment complexes in lower-income areas. As time progressed and Trump grew older, he began to take an interest in his father's business. But as young Donald Trump come to learn, his father was an object not just of admiration, but of intimidation as well. In The Art of the Deal, Trump talks about how tough his father was. His father would often chastise him when he would lose at sporting events and other social activities. In the book, he was quoted his father saying, quote, "There are winners and losers in the game of life, Donald, and remember, nobody likes a loser." Trump also goes on to talk about how he had a special connection to his mother, and that no matter what path he decided to take in life, his mother was his strongest advocate, his biggest fan, and his greatest supporter. It was in those statements of affirmation from his mother that Donald Trump began to build the foundation for what would become a multi-billion-dollar global property and real estate empire. With big dreams and ideas comes an even bigger ego. While Donald Trump worked his way up in the shadow of his father, he comes to learn that no matter what he did, nothing of his own doing was ever satisfactory for his father, and he outlines this in his book. As Fred Trump began to stick to small-time, safe, and secure property deals, Donald decided against the advice of his father and took his vision and $1 million to Manhattan to start creating his 24-karat gold empire. According to Otto Kernberg, as children grow and mature, their object relations and ideas of self-concept are not yet fully developed. It is because of this that their ideal method of regulation, as it relates to self-esteem, is largely centered around instant external gratification. In order for a person to feel good about themselves, they make great efforts and go to great lengths, sometimes often unrealistic and excessive, in order to get others to admire them for what they have rather than who they are. In the case of Donald Trump, him deliberately going against the advice of his father to take the Trump real estate brand to Lower Manhattan is an example of this very idea. In order for Trump to get people to recognize him and admire him, he wanted to build the biggest possible building he could and decorate it in such a degree that those who saw it would walk away not only impressed, but envious. Kernberg states that people are often not impressed nor envious of such ostentatious maneuver. However, given the notoriety of the individual upon which such envy is expressed to, many will grow to become impressed and envious simply by mere curiosity of the person themselves. As years passed and Trump's empire expanded beyond New York City into the shores of Atlantic City, New Jersey, Trump's lavish and boastfully ego-driven lifestyle was all part of a large plan to turn the very name of Trump into a brand. It wasn't long after the Trump Tower was complete that Donald began to take the name and turn it into not just a brand, but a household name. Soon came Trump the board game, Trump Airlines, Trump casinos, and Trump golf courses, to name a few. Meanwhile, while his epic and over-the-top lifestyle began to flourish, his critics began to come after him. When narcissism transcends from adolescence into adulthood, this is the period of development where the typical characteristics of how a narcissistic person would act and behave begin to develop. This mental state is achieved because of the existence of object relations. In the case of Trump, this would be his buildings and his possessions. Because Trump had spent a great deal of his life developing positive relationships with a female, in this case his mother, he developed a sense that he could do no wrong and thusly created an internalized, positive mental ideology of himself and of objects. Kernberg would suggest that this is a byproduct of positive object relations as an integrated sense of self. He believed that a person of this nature, like Donald Trump, would go on to be able to cope with the many elements of good and bad that exist in individuals and with himself. In addition, he considers Freud's view of the superego and how this is adaptive and able to deal with the issue of disparity between one's actual self and one's ideal self. As a result of this development, a person is able to maintain a positive self-concept no matter what negativity comes their way, thus allowing a person the ability to control their self-esteem and ideal self. Kernberg also theorized that those who exhibit normal adult narcissism will often rely on an inner voice that validates everything they do and all that they say to become accurate and honest. Under this theory, an individual is able to play a vital and active role in the lives of those he or she surrounds himself with, allowing him or her the ability to operate without any form of stable or realistic moral system of judgment. It is in this statement that Kernberg believed this type of behavior would lead to increased bouts of aggression and anger towards others who did not see the world in the same manner as they do. Trump engaged in this very behavior when various news media outlets would call out his false statements. Trump would claim that the media was nothing but, quote, enemies of the state, and, quote, fake news. Kernberger also states that this behavior transcends into various levels of sexual deviancy, such as adultery. This is also true when we consider the 3 marriages and many affairs Trump has had with women over the years, and his overall attitude towards his fame, and how that gives him the right to treat women in a more sexually explicit manner. When considering these theories, one can easily align them with specific examples that further support the theory that Donald Trump has some form of a narcissistic personality disorder. While shortly after his election, Trump began to fire individuals who sought to present themselves to others as the gatekeeper to the Oval Office and the ear to the president. Trump regards himself as the leading voice of authority not only in government as a politician, but in real estate as a developer. If Trump thought it was a good idea then, everybody else had better share in his exact sentiments and agree that it was indeed a good idea. This included such risky business ventures as the Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, the Trump Soho building, which closed its operations after less than 10 years of failed business, and Trump Airlines. During the early stages of his presidency, while policies were being negotiated, if you took any strides to undermine him or make the office upon which he resides something that is beneath you, then you are attempting to alter his sense of self, his ego, and his self-esteem. In order to put these pieces together, it's important to look at the concept of narcissistic personality disorder as a whole. Narcissistic Personality Disorder, or NPD, falls under the psychological category of classic narcissistic pathology. Kernberg believed that these are individuals who exhibit and actively demonstrate this type of personality. He also believes that there are often people who are obsessed with themselves. This includes personal image, both physically and reputably. They express their love for others by using overstated words of affirmation in order to emphasize their point of view, and frequently engage in behavior that is considered to be morally deviant. An example of this would be how Donald Trump utilizes word choice in his speeches, frequently emphasizing such phrases as, quote, the best, fantastic, tremendous, and closing out his persuasive argument with two simple words, quote, believe me. People with NPD are considered to be larger-than-life characters who view their life in a grandiose manner, often fantasizing about excess in all walks of life such as love, interpersonal relationships, beauty, happiness, power, and influence. Kernberg theorized that individuals who are examples of NPD frequently struggle with sexuality and self-love. To combat this issue, they will often engage in sexual promiscuity with others, not for the physical pleasure of it, but rather in the hopes that they will win their praise and admiration. Even despite their efforts, they're often met with disappointment as they were unable to win over their sexual partner. This is also evident in relationships with individuals in a non-sexual manner. As mentioned earlier, Trump has a well-known history of sexual promiscuity that has hung over him throughout his adult life. When the outcome of an interaction with a new person does not turn out as they had expected, or if the person was unable to be swayed or impressed by their grandiose persona and lifestyle, they will instantly begin to express intense feeling of extreme anger and can sometimes result in physical altercations with friends and family. Take, for example, when Trump's right-hand man and chairman of his 2016 campaign, Steve Bannon, began using his weight in the White House as a way to spread his power and influence into his own personal ventures. When Trump learned that Bannon was no longer mystified by the trappings of his office and no longer hypnotized by the grandiosity that was Trump himself, he became furious, took to Twitter to chastise his actions, and then abruptly fired him. When individuals with NPD perceive that others are attempting or have attempted to achieve something for themselves at the expense of their power and authority, they exhibit great amounts of anger, sometimes envy, but will always work toward degrading and destroying the personal character of the other person by devaluing them publicly. In Trump's case, he used his 51 million followers on Twitter as a way to play down Bannon's role in his administration, attack his personal character, and completely delegitimize his efforts. Kernberg suggested that in his theory, individuals with NPD have a tendency to use their power as an advantage over others in order to maintain their superiority complex and superego. As a result of this, he noted that it also prevents this person from being able to form stable and long-lasting relationships. When we consider these examples and compare them to his adolescent development, it is a very strong possibility that Trump has a form of narcissistic personality disorder. Even if we examine the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, we would likely not be surprised to learn that Trump's behavior can be directly correlated to NPD criteria. The real question to consider is, can a person of power be an effective leader if they actively exhibit classic examples of NPD on a regular basis? Can they communicate well enough in order to lead the free world? If we look back to history at other leaders such as Fidel Castro, Saddam Hussein, and even Hugo Chavez, we can also see even more examples of NPD-related behavior. Even though history has marred them as tyrannical dictators, one can't help but wonder if one day history will judge Donald Trump the same way.